At the end of 1992, Queen Elizabeth, who is known for her mild and restrained speech, delivered a speech at a large banquet. Reflecting on the year that had just passed, she said, "Looking back at 1992, I cannot describe it as a happy one. In the words of an old saying, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis." What exactly happened in 1992 that led the Queen to describe it as a horrible year so openly in front of so many people? After all, that year, Queen Elizabeth II had just celebrated her Silver Jubilee, marking 40 years on the throne. At 66 years old, she appeared vigorous and full of spirit. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, was still alive, her husband, Prince Philip, was by her side, and her children were all grown up with 6 grandchildren. It should have been a great time to enjoy life. So, what was it that troubled the Queen so much? In the end, it was all due to her troublesome children. We all know that Queen Elizabeth II has 4 children: the heir to the throne Charles, the dashing Princess Anne, the unreliable Prince Andrew, and the relatively low-profile Prince Edward. Among these 4, 3 experienced family breakdowns in 1992. That year, Prince Charles officially announced his separation from Princess Diana. At the beginning of the year, Princess Anne was still denying divorce rumors, but by April, she had completed her divorce proceedings with her husband and went on to remarry later that year. Prince Andrew's wife, Sarah, was embroiled in scandal due to infidelity and compromising photos, leading to her being expelled from the royal family and forced to announce their separation. The Queen, who had always prided herself on being the model of the perfect family, faced unprecedented frustration with her children's failed marriages. The paths her 4 children took deviated significantly from her original expectations. The royal image, which she could maintain effortlessly with a calm smile and a wave, was thoroughly shattered by her children. Is it impossible to be a competent monarch and have a perfect family at the same time? In 1952, King George VI passed away from lung cancer, and 26-year-old Elizabeth suddenly found herself ascending to the throne. At that time, her 2 children, Charles and Anne, were only 3 and 2 years old, respectively. The Queen's numerous official duties meant she had little time to care for her children, so Charles and Anne were looked after by nannies, and the Queen's role was more of a visitor. If she was in London, she would see her children twice a day, after breakfast and after afternoon tea. This kind of visiting-style parenting was a long-standing tradition in British high society. When the Queen travelled abroad, Charles and Anne might not see their mother for several months, or even half a year. There was a scene that the media once criticised. When the Queen and Prince Philip returned from a 6-month Commonwealth tour, 4-year-old Charles hurried to meet his parents, but instead of receiving a hug from his mother, he was greeted with a handshake. Occasionally, the Queen would engage in some parent-child activities with her son, such as teaching him to ride a horse. However, Charles was timid and always scared when riding, so the Queen gradually gave up. This distant parent-child relationship persisted into Charles' adulthood without ever being alleviated. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was very fond of her grandson Charles, finding his sensitive and shy demeanor somewhat reminiscent of her late husband, George VI. She also noticed that Charles shared her interests in music, painting, and gardening. Therefore, at her residence, she created an environment where Charles could be close to art and nature, which had a lasting impact on his life. When it was time for Charles to attend secondary school, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, suggested sending him to Eton College, as it was attended by many aristocratic children and was close to London. However, Charles' father, Prince Philip, vetoed this suggestion. He believed that his eldest son was indecisive and prone to tears, and that it was time for some external intervention. Prince Philip sent Charles to his alma mater, a Scottish boarding school known for its strict discipline and Spartan physical regimen. At this school, all students, including Charles, had to wear shorts year-round and take cold showers even in winter. Worse yet, the school had a serious bullying problem. Any student who tried to befriend Charles was mercilessly mocked for currying favor with the future king, and eventually, no one dared to approach him. Charles found his time there unbearable, describing the school as a prison in letters home. Even the Queen could not bear to see her son suffer, and after a year, she considered transferring him to another school. However, Prince Philip was adamant that Charles had to stay until graduation, otherwise, it would be an admission that the future king was weak. Charles had to endure the ordeal until he graduated from the school. Although he eventually graduated and went on to study at Cambridge University, the unhappy experiences during his secondary school years left a deep scar on Charles. After a nightmarish adolescence, Charles was pleasantly surprised to find himself very popular in the dating scene. Throughout the 1970s, countless young women, mostly from noble families, wanted to become his girlfriend. Even US President Richard Nixon tried to introduce his daughter to Charles. However, around 1972, Charles met Camilla and was deeply attracted to her. The two had a passionate romance for a while, but then Charles had to report to the Royal Navy. Before leaving, he hesitated about proposing but ultimately did not make a decision. Camilla, in turn, married Princess Anne's former boyfriend, becoming Mrs. Parker Bowles. Charles had a spiritual mentor, his great-uncle Lord Mountbatten. Many royal observers say that if Mountbatten had not been assassinated in 1979, the tragic marriage between Diana and Charles might never have happened. Charles took all his girlfriends to meet Mountbatten, who truly understood Charles and would have likely recognized any incompatibility between the couple. It is undeniable that both the Queen and Prince Philip misjudged Diana. They believed that a young, beautiful, and naive girl would win Charles's heart, not realizing that Charles needed someone like Camilla, who could cheer him up and manage his emotions. According to Charles's admission, it was in 1986, 5 years after his marriage to Diana, that he rekindled his affair with Camilla. It is said that the Queen strongly disliked Camilla and vowed to make Charles leave that wicked woman, but by then, Charles was no longer the boy seeking his parents' approval. The Queen and Prince Philip's attempts to mediate between Charles and Diana were ineffective. Their last attempt was in 1992. Despite knowing that both Charles and Diana were having affairs, the Queen ordered Diana to accompany Charles on a visit to South Korea to maintain the royal family's image. However, the couple appeared unhappy throughout the trip and had no interaction with each other. The subsequent events are well known, so I won't elaborate further here. Unlike Charles, Princess Anne was outgoing and mischievous from a young age. If scolded by their father, Charles might cry, whereas Anne would retort back. Despite their different personalities, the siblings had a very close relationship. With their parents often absent, they spent their childhood in each other's company. Anne was the first British royal princess to receive a formal school education, but her academic performance was not impressive. After graduating from high school, she did not pursue further studies and instead began working for the royal family. After taking on royal duties, the proud princess faced some difficulties with the media. The public and the media's perception of a British princess was still shaped by the image of the Queen and Princess Margaret, who were known for their radiant beauty and charm. Princess Margaret, in particular, was always the center of attention and even set fashion trends. Anne, on the other hand, did not entirely inherit her parents' refined looks, and she was not particularly eloquent in front of the camera, often appearing serious, which made her less popular with the public. Later, when her sister-in-law Diana married into the royal family, the media frequently compared the two, often mocking Anne. However, the subsequent decades have shown that it was precisely Anne's calm and resilient nature that solidified her position within the royal family. Princess Anne was the first of the Queen's 4 children to get married. For details about Anne's premarital relationship with Camilla's former husband, you can refer to my previous video, so I won't elaborate here. Anne's husband, Mark, was an equestrian coach who shared her passion for horse riding. However, a few years into their marriage, things began to fall apart. Mark fathered an illegitimate child in New Zealand during their marriage. When the child's mother confronted him, Mark initially refused to acknowledge it, prompting her to sue him. The media exposed the entire affair, causing Anne considerable embarrassment. However, Anne herself had an affair with a former royal equerry, and her love letters were also leaked to the media. After her divorce in 1992, Princess Anne married the former royal equerry. Because it was a second marriage, the wedding could not take place in a church in England, so the entire royal family accompanied Princess Anne to a small church in Scotland for the ceremony. Anne's ex-husband, Mark, also remarried and had a daughter named Stephanie. In 2022, Stephanie had her wedding, and Princess Anne attended with her son, daughter, granddaughter, and grandson, indicating that she has a good relationship with her ex-husband's family. We know that Charles and Anne have very different personalities. When it comes to the Queen's third child, Andrew, the difference is even more pronounced. Andrew is 10 years younger than, and Anne was the first child born to a reigning monarch in over 100 years. Compared to his older siblings, he received much more affection from the Queen from a young age. His personality was also lively and energetic. Like Charles, he attended the same school, but unlike Charles, who was often bullied, Andrew used his royal status to bully others, which made Prince Philip quite pleased. When Andrew was born, the UK's succession laws had not yet changed, so he bypassed Anne to become second in line to the throne after Charles. Andrew was essentially spoiled from a young age and developed some peculiar habits. For example, he had a particular fondness for teddy bears, with dozens collected from around the world displayed in his bedroom. These teddy bears had specific placement requirements. During the day, they all had to be on the bed arranged from largest to smallest, and at night, his favorite bears had to remain on the bed, each with its name, while the rest had fixed places. If the servants arranged them incorrectly, Prince Andrew would shout and throw tantrums. It is unclear how Prince Philip tolerated his son's hobby, given that he was the kind of father who sent his sons to Scotland for rigorous training. However, there is one aspect where Andrew followed in Prince Philip's footsteps. He, too, joined the Navy. At 19, Andrew officially joined the Royal Navy and became a naval pilot. In 1982, during the Falklands War between the UK and Argentina, Andrew went directly to the front lines. The commanding officers were very nervous, hinting at the dangers the prince faced. However, Andrew was brave and insisted on serving on the front lines during the conflict. The Queen also supported him and was proud of his decision. After the war ended, Andrew returned home to much acclaim. As we mentioned earlier, Andrew was lively and not at all as reserved as his siblings in front of the cameras. Privately, he also had a playboy personality, earning him the widely known nickname Randy Andy. In 1986, Andrew married Sarah Ferguson, a royal acquaintance he had known since childhood. However, this marriage also ended in divorce. The main reason for their divorce was Andrew's prolonged absence due to his military service, which left Sarah feeling lonely and led to her infidelity. After their official divorce, Sarah did not receive the generous compensation from the royal family that Diana did. Combined with her lavish spending habits, Andrew felt compassionate and allowed Sarah to move back in with him and their 2 daughters. As of today, both of them are over 60 years old, and despite being divorced for nearly 30 years, they still live together. Let's talk about some scandals involving Andrew. After retiring from the Navy, Andrew served as the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. During his tenure, he was repeatedly suspected of enriching himself, including using extravagant perks for personal travel under the guise of official trips. Later, the media revealed that the son-in-law of the president of Kazakhstan purchased Andrew's country estate at a price significantly higher than market value, never actually residing there, while Andrew helped Kazakhstan secure an energy cooperation agreement worth over £300 million. Additionally, Andrew had close ties with the son of Gaddafi and was rumoured to be involved in illicit arms deals. These incidents led many to view Andrew as a ticking time bomb lurking beside the Queen. In 2015, Andrew was implicated as one of Epstein's clients, with Epstein allegedly introducing underage girls to him. With this revelation, even the Queen couldn't protect Andrew, announcing that he would no longer undertake any royal duties and stripping him of all his military titles. That's why, during the mourning events following the Queen's death, Andrew was the only one among her 4 children not allowed to wear military attire. Now, King Charles III and Prince William are eager to distance the royal family from the negative impact caused by Andrew, and it's unlikely that we'll see much of Andrew in royal public events in the future. Finally, let's talk about the story of Queen Elizabeth's youngest son, Prince Edward. Edward is a whole 16 years younger than Charles and had average academic performance from an early age. In his A-level exams, Edward only achieved 1 C and 2 DS. Nevertheless, the royal family still allowed him to attend Cambridge University. Edward studied history at Cambridge and eventually graduated, becoming one of the few members of the British royal family at the time to have a university degree. After graduating, Edward followed in his father and brother's footsteps by joining the Royal Navy. However, he lasted only 10 weeks in the Navy before deciding to leave. His father, Prince Philip, who was then Admiral of the Fleet in the Royal Navy, was greatly disappointed by his son's lack of commitment and berated Edward until he cried. Edward's ambition was in the entertainment industry. In 1987, Edward organized a participation of his sister and brother Andrew and sister-in-law Sarah in a famous British entertainment show called It's a Knockout. Later, Edward himself established a film production company and utilized his royal status to produce several documentaries about royal history and palaces. However, due to poor sales, his company faced bankruptcy and eventually closed down in 2007. Since then, Edward has been fully dedicated to royal duties, up until the present day. In 1999, Edward married his girlfriend Sophie after a 5-year courtship, making him the only one among the Queen's 4 children who hasn't divorced. After the Queen first met Sophie, she reportedly said, "This little girl will be overlooked in a crowd." However, after dealing with 2 troublesome daughters-in-law, the Queen realized that Sophie was the most reliable, so she has been very kind to her ever since. Looking at the current British royal family, few members diligently assist King Charles III in his duties.